It's okay not to be okay.
My story, like most people's, begins with my childhood. I had a loving family, perhaps too loving in a way because they became very overprotective. This meant that a lot of the time I didn't share in the experiences of my peers, and that caused a distance to develop.
I grew up in the 70s in a normal, loving family. It wasn't until I turned 15 that things began to change. I was bullied at school and became rebellious to authority.
As a child, I could not get a grasp of reading and writing. By the time I got to middle school, it was becoming a bit more of a problem. And at the age of 9, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. There was no resources at the school to help me, and I was put in the remedial class and had no chance of doing any exams.
Over time, that developed into isolation and then outright bullying. And this is where I think most of my mental health problems, which were later diagnosed, developed.
Childhood, I think, can be summed up by saying this. I made some good decisions, I made some bad decisions, and I'm sure if you asked my parents, they would say the same of themselves.
At the age of 12, my parents bought a hotel in Whitley Bay, where large amounts of people would stay on a daily basis. When recession came round, my parents struggled with money and turned to North Tyneside Council to take in homeless and struggling families. During this time, I witnessed a lot of abusive behaviours and drug taking.
Some members of my family reacted badly to me, saying I had mental health. I had an auntie who was schizophrenic and my dad started comparing me to her. He said if I didn't pull myself together, I would end up like her.
I felt like I was written off by the teachers and started to believe them. Luckily for me, my parents scraped the money together to send me to the Dyslexia Institute in Jesmond. This changed my life educationally, and by the age of 11 I was reading books for my age group.
After that, I was tarred with the black sheep of the family label, which continued until I was 47.
About this time I started to get bullied by other kids in the mainstream class. It felt like they looked down on me and they resented me. The bullying made me feel terrible. There were fights, calling my parents, and I felt it was hard enough to pass my exams without putting up with this. I didn't feel like I had the strength to deal with it, so I avoided going to school altogether.
To help survive this, I developed an attitude of I don't care. I don't care what you think, I don't care what you feel. This is me. If you don't like it, that's your problem. The other thing that kept me going was hope. The hope that, of course, school would end and things would get better. It didn't happen that way. As is probably the truth for most people.
As is normal, when I became an adult, I tried to do adult things. So I worked, I met a few people, I got married, pretty much the normal things that young people do when they're trying to be grown-ups.
After school, I started as a porter at Ashton Hospital in 1987. I was there until 2003. The job was good, but around this time, I started to struggle with my anger. If I look back on things, I've always been angry, but it seemed not to impact on me. But I was always getting into fights, and anyone I saw being bullied, I would step in and try to help.
I moved out of home at the age of 17 with my partner at the time. I fell pregnant at the age of 18 while in full-time employment as a nursery assistant. My daughter was born after a traumatic pregnancy, getting preeclampsia 4 weeks before my due date. This resulted in me being induced early. My kidneys were failing. I couldn't look after myself, and I believe this to be the start of my mental health.
I jumped from job to job, partying, taking recreational drugs, with weeks of depression and weeks of mania. Bipolar people love the mania. It's fun and exciting.
After school ended, life did not take the course I had expected. My father died. I was forced to take over his responsibilities in the business. But things stayed stable. They were always there in the background, but because life was stable, my mental health problems were stable, so they didn't really affect us. But they were always there.
So having come north, we found a place to live and started a family. 2 beautiful girls. And because my wife had a degree and a good career, I relished the fact that I got to be at home raising my girls. So this is just what I did for nearly 8 years. I immersed myself into doing what I could to make sure that my girls were looked after and had a life they could be proud of. And yes, I made mistakes and I wasn't perfect, but life was good. Life was good, that is, until the divorce. What a mess that divorce was.
I got married in 1995. We had been together for 4 years. My eldest daughter was born in 1996. She was my be-all and end-all. I was so proud, she was so beautiful. I can remember my mental health started to go downhill in 1998. I started to use alcohol as a crutch. I became very angry with the world and would easily lose my temper. This caused a few visits to Bedlington police station. After time it became apparent I needed help and I was on a destructive path.
I then split from my daughter's dad at the age of 21 as I felt the relationship wasn't working, where I then went to meet my son's dad. We dated for 2 years before I moved to Leicester with my daughter.
This then would be when I began falling down the rabbit hole. I didn't notice. I guess I was busy trying to be normal, trying to rebuild a life. Really sliding further down with every part of the situation. By the time my ex-wife found a reason to stop me being able to see my girls, I was in a no way back frame of mind. My own mind turned on me, convinced me the options were limited, and I believed myself.
My GP at the time said that I had intermittent explosive disorder, but I was not offered any help or counselling and was left to deal with it on my own. I felt that there was no improvement in how I felt. After 6 years of marriage, things started to break down between us.
I was doing too much and my health was deteriorating both mentally and physically. I was under a lot of pressure, too much to be honest, with very little time off. This continued year after year.
By 2001 I met my now wife. We were married in 2004 and I have 4 wonderful girls.
I believed my own mind. Why wouldn't I? All the justification and the conversation in my head convinced me. Everyone would be better off without me. This then is where I started planning, tying up loose ends, making sure it was all go as I intended.
I became more and more poorly. 4 months before I was sectioned, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, a chronic pain condition. I was put on all kinds of medication and I began to tic and stutter. The pain became so bad I ended up in A&E. Most days I was bedridden, shaking in pain. I started smoking marijuana to relieve the pain and eventually this caused me to go into psychosis. I was sectioned by the mental health team and spent 2 months in a psychiatric hospital. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
In 2007 I had a relapse. We bought our first house together and this has put an immense strain on me. I once again turned to alcohol as my crutch, but this time I was hiding it, buying it in secret, waiting to be caught out and to be punished.
A few months later, my son was born in December 2011. I had been suffering from a lot of anxiety during this pregnancy. Following being induced, I had an emergency section. I nearly lost my little boy. The hours after were a blur and developed pubertal psychosis, hearing and seeing things. I seen several psychiatrists and finally discharged home where I was so poorly I wanted to end mine and my little boy's life, as I'd realised I'd been living in an emotionally, financial and sexually abusive, controlled relationship.
When all was done, I took myself off down the woods, sat on the riverbank, drank a 12-year-old bottle of whiskey laced with all the medications I could find in the cupboard, and waited till it all kicked in.
And it was during this time that I developed my first suicidal thoughts and feelings. But because life was stable, I didn't act on them. Then all of a sudden, things changed. In my late 30s, my mother was diagnosed with dementia and I became her carer. Add to that, the family business, which I was now trying to manage single-handedly, was failing. So as you can imagine, the stress ramped up incredibly quickly. That, coupled with anxiety and depression, meant things went down very, very quickly for me. And this resulted in me eventually attempting suicide.
It was a downhill spiral which I couldn't see an end to. I even tried taking tablets on occasion, thinking that my family would be better off without me. This was a cry for help, I can see that now. My wife always stood by me, but she was at the end of her tether.
The following few days are mainly a blur, but I do remember being shouted at by an officer whose name I would never learn. And for some reason, I remember being given a can of Coke before being taken to the hospital. I was to be there for a week.
I ended up in care. And I spent several years in a secure facility doing therapy. While that might sound like a bad thing, for me, it works out very well, because it gave me a chance to figure out where things were, to see what mistakes I made and how to correct them, to learn to understand myself, my issues, and how to deal with them. Now, these issues are part of me. They always have been, they always will be. They will never go away. But I have learned to cope with them, deal with them, and live with them far better than I ever have before.
I don't know who made the decisions, but I was released to go home after that week. One of the many professionals I encountered decided I would be better off recovering at home, I suppose. I should have spoken up, said something about the fact that home was a part of the problem, but better to stay quiet. Why make a fuss?
I had thought about my daughter and knew she would be okay with her father, but my little boy had come with me as I couldn't bear leaving him with his dad. My husband to this day doesn't realise, but he saved my life by shouting and locking me in home that evening. By the morning this feeling had passed, but I started to plan a way out of the relationship with my children, which caused me to have a breakdown. Even further, I got sectioned in 2012 in the mother and baby unit with anxiety, mania, depression and psychosis.
One of the few things I could manage was meditation. I didn't do particularly well. It was enough to quiet the noise in my head a little. It was there in one of those little meditations that it clicked. I was ill. I would always be ill. There was nothing I could do about it. It was a part of me. This realisation is really what changed everything. If I was going to get better, I would have to make it happen. I would have to do something about my illness, otherwise there would be no being well again. I had to stop hiding, go out, deal with my issues. One thing at a time, I did just that. Piece by piece, I chased the semblance of a life, a home, a job, some hope for the future.
In 2021, I was finally diagnosed with bipolar type 1. This has made me feel relieved in some respect, and I'm learning to deal with my mental health on a daily basis. I'm also able to recognise triggers and recognise when I'm becoming unwell.
I found the courage to fight back. The dark times got lighter. I was managing to climb out of my rabbit hole. The bad days got less, the time between them got longer, and my life became fuller. I was enjoying my job. I was getting on with life. With the support of a few people around me that understood, I found the courage inside myself to live. And one day, I met a girl, and here I am, married with a stepdaughter. Sarah and I have 2 other beautiful children together, and life is good. The depression is less, and I'm alive.
Eventually, I left there, moved into a hostel, which was a lovely little place, but obviously just a temporary situation. From there, I got my own home, which is where I am now, and I am loving it.
I am pleased to say that I still have my wife and family. With their help, I can have a drink and not get into the state of being intoxicated that I need to fight and argue. I am fit and healthy and enjoy my dogs, walking, camping, and now wild swimming, and have discovered the joys of paddleboarding.
My hospital stay was a 4-week section. I then returned home with the support of my CPN. In 2015, I returned home to the northeast with my daughter and son. I had the support of my family and friends, but the control continued with lies and manipulation with courts, resulting in me having a further breakdown in 2016, where I handed my son to my ex-husband while I was unwell. I spent 2 to 3 weeks at St George's Acute Mental Health Ward.
Fast forward 6 years, something isn't right. Life is great, but I need a little extra something, more fulfilling. One day my friend passes me a job advert for peer support worker, working in mental health. Best of all, the only real requirement is that you'd had to have your own mental health problems.
For those that don't know, a peer supporter is somebody who either has experience of mental health problems or being a carer for somebody who does. I have both. And so now I use my experience to help those who need it.
At present, I am currently a peer support worker for the NHS, which is something I have wanted to do since being in hospital in 2016, as I believe it is a rewarding job that helps both staff and patients have an understanding of mental health from a different perspective, by being able to share lived experience of mental health and struggles within every day.
After a long recovery, I decided to leave my business and now work as a peer supporter at the same hospital I was a patient. I support patients in their recovery journeys. I love the job role, it's very rewarding, and I offer hope, support and make real connections with the people I work with.
It's not about telling people this is how I became well. It's you can see I became well, so you can do it too.
I still don't know how or why I got the job, but as I write this, I'm at the start of my 4th week, and I've never felt more at home. My experiences, the things I went through, are actually a benefit to other people. The best part of this is that I'm learning and growing as well.
I have now been a peer supporter for 4 months. It is a job I am finding rewarding, helping others see that there is hope and that with help and support we can all beat our demons. Our life is not planned and there are many roads we can choose. Take time and reflect. Always remember it is okay to be unwell.
So to the future, the rabbit hole is still there, and although I've no intention of starting to fall back down, I know there's always the possibility. But in the meantime, I have the most amazing friends, family and colleagues, and these people are all part of my support system. I know this time, should I start to fall, there will be plenty of hands reaching out to pull me back up. So at this point, I'm looking forward to growing into myself more, learning to become the person I know I can be, and getting as much as life has to offer.